As the story begins, a lady named Rish Irmgard Weitzner stands before a prince who says to her that with a heart as wicked as hers, she was unfit to be her betrothed, and because of that, he declares that as of that moment, their engagement has ended. However, she simply responds with, "You understand," and everyone present there was just left confused. The prince asks her if she did not want to know her fate since he was breaking up with her after all, and she says she did not want to and just walks away, thinking to herself that she needed to get her stuff before her parents hear about this. She wanted to prepare for her ambition in this life, but first she needed to decide what it was. It also turns out she knew exactly what was going to happen next because it was her 7th time, and she just wished she could go back to an earlier point so she could have more time to prepare. In a little backstory, it is then explained that in her first life, she was accused of many crimes she did not even commit and was sentenced to exile. Her parents disowned her, and she wandered the streets with only the clothes on her back. At that moment, she met some traders. She went with the traders to the neighboring country and became their apprentice and learned the tricks of the trade. Soon, she became independent and wandered all over the world. She collected exciting treasures and sold them to those who would most enjoy them. And she even traded with the king of the desert and the snow prince. She had dreamed of traveling to every country in the world, and she only had one country left when suddenly she was slain in battle. But then, when she regained consciousness, she was reliving the night that the prince ended their engagement. Everything was as it was 5 years ago, and she was wearing the same dress and jewelry that she sold to survive. She wondered if it was just a dream or her life as a merchant was a dream. She simply ignores the prince and runs back home, thinking that if she rushes, she could make it back, and she did. She started packing her things while her parents kept asking her what she was doing, but all she could think about was that she could expand faster if she were to start with more starting capital. After collecting everything she needed, she headed to the forest where she first met the traders. However, this time, she did not run into them. Devastated, she thought if it was because she went to her house, and at that moment, she realized that if she could relive her life anew, she could also make new mistakes. But then, in her second life, she sold her jewels and used that money to travel the seas and learned medicine. The skills she learned in her first life proved to be very useful for her, and just like that, she was able to mass-produce medicine and saved a prince's life. She lived a fulfilled life as an apothecary. However, this time she lost her life when she was traveling to a plague-ridden country. When she regained consciousness, she was back in that same moment, and 3, 4, 5 times, no matter how many times she died, her life always reset to that same moment. In one life, she was a maid-servant wishing her mistress a happy marriage, and in another, she dressed up as a man and became a knight. Every life she lived was quite fun and fulfilling, and she lived each life to the fullest, without regrets. However, every single time, she died when she turned 20. So back to the present, now she had gotten dumped by this prince 7 times, and she just did not care about him even a little as she simply began to walk away. Before going, she wishes him and Mary all the best, and the prince was just shocked to see that she knew about Mary. But she, on the other hand, could only think about what her future had for her and wondered what kind of life she would have this time. All of her past lives had been a banger for her, however, they had been too hectic at the same time. So this time around, she wanted to take it easy, and of course, she did not want to die. As she got to live this life once again, she was determined to live it to the fullest and have fun while also making sure not to get killed this time around. On her way back, she wondered if she could find a shortcut home and even considered jumping off the balcony into the garden. But she brushes that thought off and decides to simply act as she did during her 6th life as a knight when suddenly, she bumps into someone. That someone turned out to be a man, and one look at his blue eyes, she instantly recalled that he was Emperor Arnold Han, the man who ended her 6th life by stabbing her in the heart. She was stunned to see that he was also present at the royal ball, and he asked her if she knew who he was since he had never been to this country before. She simply smiles at him while in her mind, she thinks about the imperial state of Galkine and its mighty leader Arnold Han. In 5 years, he was going to start a great war, invading other countries, and she just did not really want him to be her enemy. So she elegantly introduces herself to him and says that she had never seen him before, but she had heard rumors about him. He praises her that she moves like a first-class swordsman and that her balance was really exceptional, and in return, she states that she just wanted to introduce herself politely. He then brings up how she called him Emperor earlier and tells her that his father was still alive, so he was merely the crown prince. So he asked her how she could make such an error, and she just stood there smiling nervously, not knowing what to say. She wonders if he knew that she knew what was going to happen in the future, but part of her also knew she was overthinking, and since she would probably never see him again, she simply bows to him and apologizes to her as there was no excuse for her rudeness. She tells him that she was in a terrible hurry, and since her former fiancé ended their betrothal, she had no time to spare goodbye, and with that said, she just ran away while he stood there all confused. She reaches the balcony in hope of reaching the garden from there, so she takes off her heels and prepares to jump when Arnold also catches up to her and sees her perfectly landing on the ground from such a height. She breaks her heels and starts running since she needed to hurry back home, while Arnold was simply amazed and had decided not to let her get away. Later, when she got back to her home, it turns out she failed to make it in time as there were a bunch of knights in front of her home. Turns out the prince was also there, and he says to her that he understands that she did not want to hear her truest love list all of her crimes, but it was his duty as the crown prince to bring an evil woman like her to justice. While she, on the other hand, was getting really annoyed since she really messed up her timing, and if only she had arrived even a second sooner, she would not have had to look at this prince's smug face. He then starts staring at her and states that she must be feeling devastated, but she simply smirks at him and questions if he's sure about that. However, the prince was just full of himself and said that it could not be more obvious that her heart was shattered as she was covered in dirt and her shoes were broken, which only showed that her despair was palpable to all. In response, she straight up asks him if he was an idiot or something because, first of all, she did not sully her dress and break her shoes because she was upset. As a matter of fact, she did not even care that he broke up with her. Everyone around them began to laugh, which made the prince quite pissed, and he told all those commoners to stop mocking him, while Rish, on the other hand, felt really glad that she did not have to live a life married to this bozo. She tells the prince that he should be treating his citizens with compassion instead of yelling at them. But then, Mary also comes in and says to her that she understood she was hurt. But how could she be so cruel to Prince Dietrich? The prince was also mad to see that she made his Mary cry again and mentions that he had heard she bullied her in school, even going as far as to lock her in an empty classroom. Risha just stayed quiet while realizing that that's what had happened, and the prince further states that there was no way that a woman with such twisted morals could be queen. She then tells the prince that she would never appear before him again, and when he asks her what she means by that, she says that from birth, she was raised to be the fiancée of the crown prince, and she had thought that was her only purpose in life. However, she had realized that she was wrong about that, and it was okay because now she could find her own path. Therefore, she clearly tells him that she did not need him in her life. Hearing that, the prince was the one who was left devastated and just fell to the ground while everyone around started laughing at him, which yet again pissed him off, and he instructed them to treat their betters with respect. Mary also tells Rish that she was being heartless. Rishi simply responds that she harbored no ill will for her either, as she understood that this was all for the sake of her family, and even though she had dealt with her, she would still have to marry Prince Dietrich. Mary was shocked to hear that from her, while she further says to her that she should never forget her life only has meaning if she follows her own dreams. She believed that she should be able to make her little brothers happy and find her own happiness. Those lines made Mary really emotional, while Rishi thought to herself that she was indeed cute. With that said, she takes her leave to stop burdening them with her presence. However, the prince just could not let her go and instructs the guards to seize her. Just then, she suddenly felt a chill down her spine, and as a guard came up to her, asking her to cooperate just for a little while, she quickly takes his sword and blocked the sword of a mysterious person who was just about to attack her. The person was none other than Arnold, and he was really impressed to see her reflexes. The knights questioned him who the hell he was, but she asked them to stand back as she could not permit the knights of this kingdom to attack the imperial prince of Galkine. Everyone was shocked after hearing who he really was, since he was the one who had single-handedly defeated an army of knights, while Rishi did not like the direction where all this was going. She asks him what his intentions were because surely he did not draw his sword as a joke, and he also admitted that he should explain himself. He kneels down before her, which leaves her really shocked, and she begins asking him why was the imperial crown kneeling before her, to which he says that he must apologize for his rudeness. He then takes her hand and says that he truly hopes that she could become his wife. Confused, she did not understand what exactly was going on and how she could even marry a man who killed her in her past life. She lifts her hand and tells him that she refuses, while thinking to herself that she had promised herself that she would live a relaxing and carefree life. However, when she looked at him, she could not understand why he was laughing with such joy even though she just rejected him. 2. Cut to a flashback of her 6th life, which was the most recent one. She wore men's clothing and became a knight. She was discovered by an order of knights during travels, and they did not realize she was a woman, so they pressured her to join them. The strenuous training made her vomit blood, and day and night, without sleep, she trained in the art of swordsmanship. Eventually, when she felt she could survive on her own, the army of Galkine led by Emperor Arnold invaded the castle. Her foe, the heir to the empire, was the one who ended her previous life. Back to the present, Prince Dietrich was dumbfounded, seeing that Arnold proposed to her, while her parents, on the other hand, were also gesturing to her to accept the proposal. But she tells them she did not intend to accept since, as she was ordered, she was going to leave this country. Just then, the king himself rushes in, and Prince Dietrich is surprised to see his father there. But then the king walks up to him and forces him to kneel before Arnold, while he does the same and apologizes to him on behalf of his idiot son, because even though he went to the trouble of coming there, he did not offer him any hospitality. Furthermore, on behalf of his idiot son, he apologizes to Rish as well, and as a king and as a father, he means that with utmost sincerity. He understood the selfishness of what he was about to say, but still, he requested her to please consider Arnold's proposal for the sake of his kingdom. She, on the other hand, starts getting restless, seeing that even the king and her parents were asking her to do so. Arnold then requests the king to lift his head and assures him that this won't damage the relationship between their countries, but he did want to have some time to speak alone with her, and hearing that, the king starts begging her. She was not a least bit interested and thought to herself that she was not obligated to listen to any of them. But then Arnold whispers to her that if she rejects this proposal, he would find another way. So considering all that and plus the king's request, she decides to hear him out. Later, when they get a room, she asks him what he was up to, and he asks her back what she meant by that. She was certain that he must have a reason for proposing a marriage to her out of the blue, and he simply replied that he had no reason, except that he had fallen for her. She could not believe the words coming out of his mouth and thought that he must be lying, while he asked her why she kept turning him down even though she was in exile without a safety net. She starts thinking that if this was her first life, she would have jumped at this chance without any question. However, since then, she had learned that life was full of possibilities. She had also learned that altering the smallest details could drastically change the future, and even though she did not know how many more lives she had left, she was sure that this was the only one where she could marry him, the dread Emperor Arnold Han. He was the kind of man who would start a war and turn against the whole world, but the main question in her mind was, why would he do such a thing? In each of her previous lives, he had started a war where there had been a lot of casualties, and so she started to wonder if she would be able to understand why he did so if she stood beside him. A part of her really wanted to find that out, however. What she needed right now was a different dream. She thinks about her life as a traitor, and she expressed to a man that becoming a traitor finally gave her an ambition of her own, since before that, she could only be the fiancée of the crown prince. That was the only future available to her. But now that she traveled so much and saw the world, she finally had an ambition of her own. The man asks her what it was, and she answers that she wanted to see all the nations of this world. She wanted to travel on her own 2 feet and explore their markets and see the smiling faces of the people living there. That was the first and real dream of her that she had held on to since her first life, and Galkine was the one country that she never reached. So coming back to the present, she tells Arnold that she could only accept this proposal on the condition of several selfish requests. He promises to fulfill all of her requests to the best of his ability, and she then starts listing that first up. He must use her designated merchant to supply the wedding ceremony, and then after the ceremony, she would like an opportunity to interact with guests from various countries. She also preferred to live apart from his parents, and he states that he had not taken her for the type to argue with in-laws, to which she clarifies that that was not it at all. Nonetheless, he asks her if there was anything else, since he was ready to do anything to have her hand in marriage. So last but not least, as she did not want to give up on her dream for this life, she tells him that she would not lift a finger around the house and would just slack off and never work. Hearing that, he simply laughs and says, "Of course." Later, as the two of them prepare to head out, she did not really want to ride in the same carriage as him, but since she did not really have a choice, she warns him not to even try to touch her, and he agrees. Just like that, several days passed on, and they continued their travels. On the 5th day, as she was taking a nap, she suddenly felt a hand reaching out to her, so she woke up and brought out the sword while questioning Arnold what he was doing. She reminds him that he promised not to lay a finger on her, and he asks her not to give him that look since he was only trying to retrieve what she took from him in her sleep. She then realizes that the sword she was holding was, in fact, his sword, and she quickly hands it back to him while apologizing to him. Her heart started beating faster as she could not believe that she used the same sword that killed her as a pillow, which was apparently a habit she got from her life as a knight. Seeing that she did not even notice that she was holding it, Arnold guessed that she must have trained so much that she never had a chance to live as a girl, and she says yes, since she did live as a man though in her past life. He then further states that even so, there was still a side of her that loved flowers as she had collected quite a bunch of them on their travels, and she answers that she did not pick these flowers just for their beauty. It's just that many rare flowers grew around there. He then informs her that he had sent a message to the area trading company to discuss business, and she thanks him for listening to her requests. He had heard so much about this company lately, so he asks her if they had always received their favor, and she says that was not it. She just heard from a friend that they trade in amazing goods, while in her mind, what she really wanted was to keep in touch with those guys in this life too, since this marriage was doomed and she was going to need an exit strategy. On top of that, he looked really dangerous. All of a sudden, their horse starts acting weird, and then a person comes up to their carriage's window and tells them to stop at once. She began to wonder what was going on outside and was about to step out, but Arnold tells her to stay put and locks her inside. She was shocked to see that the prince, rather than letting others protect him, threw himself out into danger. She was locked in, and she knew that they would target the carriage first. If they were to get in, something far worse could happen, so she decides to use an old trick and takes out her hairpin. When she was a maid, she used to use these pins to pick the lock on her mistress's door, and using the same trick, she managed to break out. However, when she stepped outside, she was shocked to see that Arnold had already defeated everyone single-handedly. He was disappointed to see that that was all they could do even though he fought them all alone, and he pointed his sword right at that man's throat. He tells him that even boring would be an overstatement, and witnessing that sight sent chills down everyone's spine who was present there. She wondered if he was going to end that man's life. However, on a closer look, she realizes that he had not killed anyone but simply knocked them out, which left her quite surprised because the Arnold Hine she knew of would have left no survivors in that situation. He notices her standing right there and asks her how she managed to get out of the carriage, but she replies that that's a secret. He simply smiles at her and tells her that she was a real enigma. Just then, a guy also comes out of the carriage and starts yelling at him. He states that he was being utterly unreasonable yet again, as fighting back was one thing, but he also stood his knights down. The person turns out to be a butler named Oliver, and Arnold tells him that if he was the only one who fights, fewer people would perish, as simple as that. Plus, there were already casualties in the vanguard, and Oliver argues that that's just coincidence. But on top of that, he even dragged Rish into danger, and Arnold informs him she did that all by herself. Meanwhile, Rishi notices the injured knights of the vanguard, and they could not feel anything. It turns out the weapons of the enemy were poisoned. He instructs the others to find their wounds and help them to suck the poison out, while Rishi takes a closer look at the poisoned dagger and then runs back inside the carriage. Oliver informs him that she was returning to the carriage, and he simply tells him to let her do as she please. More importantly, he guessed that the poison was most likely some sort of numbing toxin used by hunters, so the amount on the blade should not be enough to kill anyone. But they were still at least 2 days away from Galkine, so they needed to seek an antidote from a nearby village. Just then, Rish comes up to them and says that she could make the antidote. He asks her if she could really make an antidote, and she explains to them that the faint scent of sweetness on the weapons could only mean that the poison was made from a mixture of she-grass and blue-cap mushroom. An adult male would need to ingest a full wineglass for it to be lethal, but the dose they were attacked with was less than 1/100 of that. Because it was so cheap and easy to make, hunters often used it. She learned all this from her life as an apothecary, and she further states that it would be more effective if they boiled it down, but since they were in a hurry, she suggests using the antidote as it was. Everyone just stood there in silence, and she guessed that they must not believe her, which actually made sense as they would not just trust the medical advice of some random girl. So she then asks Arnold if she could see his sword, and he takes it out when all of a sudden she gets close to him and uses his sword to put a cut on her arm. He questions her what she was doing, but she assures him not to worry since that was not poison and demonstrates the antidote by putting it on her wound, while also explaining that it was a mash of liquori grass, luqua flowers, and carulia nuts. Furthermore, if they were still not ready to believe that it was safe, She was prepared to even eat a spoonful. With that said, they could either use this medicine, bring those knights back to Galkine while they were still numb, or they could find a village hunter and ask them for the antidote. The choice was theirs to make, and she asked them to do what they think is right while Arnold was just staring at her. Later, as they all prepared to head out, Rishi was busy organizing the flowers she had collected, and Arnold then came up to her, and he realized that she collected the flowers for their practical uses. He kept staring at those flowers, and to her, he looked like a kid studying an ant colony. He then asks her if he was in the way, and she says no, while also asking if he wanted to know something, to which he answers that that was not why he was there. It's just that she made no sense to him, and he was excited to see all the ways she would baffle him. She tells him that she did not do this to surprise him, and he states that he knew that already. He then tells her that the knight that gave an ultimatum to was from the slums. Galkine pretends to be meritocratic, however many people were not given a chance because of their origins. Despite that, he ignored the naysayers, worked hard, and became a knight. The knight with the most grievous wound had just joined them, and he had trained day and night to make sure that this mission went well. The older knight who showed her deference cared for the recruit and received his injuries trying to defend him. She was quite surprised to see that he knows a lot about his men, and he says that he handpicked them to be his knights. But the point he was trying to make was that he wanted to thank her for saving his men, and he bows to her. Rish, on the other hand, seeing him like that, could not make sense of what was happening. Arnold Hain, a tyrannical emperor in each of her past lives, and the man who looked at those bandits earlier like they were all toys he had grown bored of, was actually being sincere to her. She could not understand if this was fake or actually genuine. She tells him that she did not do anything special, but putting that aside, she brings up how he tried to grab her wrist earlier when she used his sword to wound herself, and asks him if he forgot the promise he made not to touch her, to which he replies that that was unavoidable, and she kept arguing. But she then notices that everyone else was staring at her and they seemed to be avoiding her. He explains to her that that must be because they probably suspect she was a villainess who ended her engagement for nefarious reasons, and she admits that that makes sense. Furthermore, he tells her that there was one more thing he wanted to inform her, and that was, he was required to marry royalty from another country. His father was the one who required this, and she understood that she was basically a hostage. She recalls that Galkine greatly expanded its empire through war, and to gain an advantage, they married princesses from other countries as basically a political hostage. The Crown Prince Dietrich had claimed that she was set to inherit a duchy, and that he kidnapped her, so that was why his father was ready to only accept her as a hostage. He was sure some people would treat her poorly, but he promised to deal with them personally. However, Rish, on the other hand, with her face all lit up, expresses that being a hostage was ideal. She asks him if she was a hostage, she would not have to take any responsibilities, and he says yes, which makes her really excited as she gets ready to slack off. She felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders, and she thanked him for keeping his promise, and he just said, no problem. Later, they finally arrive at Galkine, and Rishi was simply amazed to see the imperial capital, Shingis. Arnold tells her that this was the largest city in the empire and was also one of the biggest trading posts as well, while she, on the other hand, was just mesmerized to see these charming streets of white, half-timbered buildings and smiling faces on every corner. This was exactly why she had always wanted to come there. As they arrive at the royal palace, he takes her hand and helps her get down, which surprised all the knights present there. Even Oliver was surprised, since he had never seen him hold his hand out for a wound before, and when he mentioned that, she then realized she actually touched him without even thinking. Meanwhile, Oliver goes up to him and whispers something, which left Arnold quite worried. She asks him if something was wrong, and he says to her that the royal villa was not ready yet, so she would have to spend a few nights in the guest room, for which he even apologizes to her. She guessed that it would probably take a few months before the villa was ready, and since one of her wishes was to live apart from his parents, she tells him that does not mind if preparations were not finished and could stay in the villa as it was. He informs her that it had not been used in such a long time that it was covered in dust, but she assures him that she would be fine since a bit of grime and dust never bothered her. And of course, she requested him to stay in the palace until the villa was ready, because in reality, she just wanted to live alone. He simply tells her to do as she wishes and also briefs her that he was going to be busy for a few days, while Oliver adds that they have 2 weeks of public affairs to attend to. Later, as she reaches the royal villa, she notices that it was indeed pretty dusty, but other than that, it was still in very good condition. She explores the villa and goes straight to the basement, from where, suddenly, a rat comes out, and the knights that were accompanying her ask her what exactly she was doing. She answers that maids typically keep cleaning supplies in the basement, and turns out she was right as she found the equipment to start cleaning. She gets ready, just like when she used to live as a maid, and decides to get to work. While she continued to clean up the entire villa, the knights felt helpless and they asked her if there was any way they could help, but she stated that she could not possibly ask the guards to help her clean. They requested her to just stay in the palace's guest room since they could not let the fiancé of His Highness do this sort of work, and she just replied that she was really in love with this castle. In her mind, she thought that she would feel really terrible if she were to force the palace maids to work for her, since she knew exactly how hectic the life of a maid was. Besides, she told them that knowing that she had cleaned this place herself would only make it more fun for her to live there, and they understood her point, so they started helping her out of their own will. Later, while she was taking a walk, she started to think that these knights were just acting as guards, and wondered if Arnold was trying to keep an eye on him. She did not think that he had any intention of letting the emperor meet her, and since she was a political hostage, she guessed she did not need to in the first place. Arnold Hayne was destined to kill the emperor, and that was the coup that would lead to chaos. She doubted it would change anything, however, she wanted to create some distance between him and his parents, and that was why she wanted to live apart. She did not really know what kind of life he had after her death, but regardless, she knew for a fact that she would not be able to slack off if there was a war. Whether she got used as a hostage or got abandoned as a wife, her life would be terrible, and to prevent that, she needed to do what she could to prevent war. But on second thought, it did not really matter what she does. She would just end up dying when she turns 20. However, just then, she recalled all the ways of how she died: burning in a fire caused by war, dying in a war zone trying to help the sick, and getting attacked by Galkan forces. In all of her lives, she realized that Arnold's war caused all her deaths. She wondered if she could get a divorce from him. But she then decided not to regret her decision, since no matter how far she was from him in her previous lives, she still died. So this time, she was going to stand by his side and watch his every move. Just then, she noticed a couple of maids giggling among themselves, and when she looked closely, it turned out the three maids were bullying a young maid, saying that no matter how hard she works, they were going to be the chosen handmaids of the crown princess. Rish quickly rushed to that maid and asked her if she was okay, while the others questioned her who she was. They continued boasting that with their 3 years of experience, they would surely be picked to serve the crown princess, but she straight up ignored them and just focused on that girl, seeing if she was injured or anything. While the maids continued to ramble, she noticed some curtains in their hands, so she told them that they should not wash those curtains now. The maid questioned her if she was trying to say that these won't dry in the afternoon, and then also stated that the days during the spring were long. However, Rish cut her off and said that it would probably start raining soon. She pointed out that the butterflies and the bees were flying low, and those clouds looked like rain clouds, so larger items were not going to be worth the trouble. Obviously, the maids refused to listen to her, and they all just walked away. Rish then once again asked the girl if she was sure she was fine, and in response, she introduced herself as Elsie and thanked her for helping her as it made her really happy. Rishi assured her not to worry about it, but she pointed out that her dress got all dirty, so she suggested she take it off and wash it right away. A lot of soap and a good scrubbing brush should take care of it, since mud stains were normally hard to remove because soil gets trapped between the fibers. However, seeing her talking in such detail, Elsie asked her if she was already one of the princess's handmaidens, and she just remained silent. Later, while standing on her balcony, she looked over the entire city and found the capital to be really beautiful. She felt like she could just sleep right there, and as she closed her eyes, she remembered how her mother used to say that she does not need dreams since they would get in the way. As a duchess, she needed to devote herself fully to the royal family, and just like that, both her parents kept on reminding her that she needed to be elegant, behave in certain ways, and things like that. Those words were repeated to her like a curse. Just then, she opened her eyes and asked Arnold, who was standing right behind her, if it was okay for him to leave during his official affairs. Yet again, he was surprised to see that she knew he was there, since he did not think she would notice him, and she told him that he was just creeping on her, waiting for her to notice. He asked her what she was looking at, and she answered that she was looking at the city. She pointed towards a building and inquired what it was, and he stated that it was the library, which houses an international collection of books funded by the government. She was amazed to see how gigantic it was, and then further pointed at another building with a steeple, which he told her that it was a church and the steeple was a clock tower where a bell rings in the morning and at night. She continued to ask about various things, from a market to even about mountains, and he just started staring at her, so she questioned him what it was, to which he answered that he was just wondering what was so fun about all this. He asked her what was so interesting about a country she was marrying into under these circumstances, and she said to him that she had always admired this country and that she had always wanted to come there, while she thought to herself that it was actually her dream from her first life. She wanted to visit all the countries of this world, and Galkine was the last country on her list. In every life, by the time she had things all figured out, the borders were closed to all. She also told him that one possible reason she finally agreed to marry him was in fact her admiration for this country. He simply said that there was nothing admirable about this country, but she strongly argued and stated that was not true. Even the few places he had told her about already sounded fascinating. On top of that, everyone in the city seemed very happy, and the knights were so kind, and just like that, she kept counting while he simply smiled at her. She noticed that and asked if she was saying something strange, and he said that he was just impressed by her obliviousness. He expressed how he had never met a woman quite like her, the way she talks, her knowledge, and her physical abilities. None of that was necessary for her to live a normal life. After hearing that, she remembered the words her parents used to say, that she does not need dreams since they would only get in the way. She told him that whether or not others think it's necessary, her skills and knowledge were her treasures, and they could never be taken away from her, as they were an essential part of her life. Thinking that she would never be cursed by her parents' words anymore, she boldly stated that she was the only person who decides the worth of her life. Arnold, on the other hand, just said, "I know," and stroked her face as he told her that she should pursue her dreams here, and he promised to support all of her dreams. He once again reminded her that he had fallen for her, and she just stood there, frozen in place. He then takes his leave, but before heading out, he mentions that he ended up breaking his promise after all. After he left, she just sat on the floor, and with her face all red, she was simply unable to understand him at all and wondered what he was thinking. The next morning, when she woke up, she was not even sure which lifetime this was. Remembering it was her 7th life, she just goes back to sleep since she had no training, no need to tend to her herb garden, prepare breakfast, or check on the experiments from the night before. She just wanted to sleep since this bed of hers was very soft. But just then, someone knocks on her door and asks her if she was awake. She quickly gets dressed, and when she opens the door, it turns out the person was Oliver. He apologizes to her for disturbing her so early in the morning, but was impressed to see that she looked ready for the day. She notices him yawning, so she asks him if he did not get enough sleep, to which he answers that he actually slept better than His Highness since he was the one who had not gotten a wink of sleep yesterday. She thought to herself he should have gone to bed after what happened the other night. She brings up that they actually came all the way to her country even though they were so busy, and he assures her not to worry about it. In the first place, Arnold had claimed that he would never marry, but then he found her. Just then, she notices something, so she spreads her arms and tells him to just go ahead and take a good look. Confused, he asks her what she was saying, and just like an appraiser determines if an item is genuine or a merchant selecting the most valuable gems from a pile, she already knew that he was inspecting her. He was left shocked to see that she knew, and he quickly apologizes to her, saying that he did not expect her to notice, but guessed that all that martial training must have made her very observant. While she, on the other hand, thinks that it was actually her trader's instinct, and she comments that he must be someone who cares deeply about His Highness. She asks him how long he had been by his side, and he says to her that he was originally a knight candidate, however, he suffered a terrible injury. As he was about to be dismissed, Arnold found him, and so he had served him for 10 years now. Since he was that significant to him, she asks him if he knew why he proposed to her, and he answers that honestly even he was surprised to see that, but it simply seemed like his feelings changed after he met her, while she, on the other hand, was shocked to see that he had not even revealed his true motives to his most trusted valet. He then further tells her that he had never seen him this happy before since he just smiles so much when he was with her. However, looking at her, she did not look especially pleased. She expresses that she feels like he thinks of her as a shiny new toy, and Oliver did not even deny that and simply laughed. Putting all that aside, he gives her the guest list for the wedding in 3 months, and she thanks him since she was just about to ask him for that. The guest list contained the names of all the important people from every nation that Arnold would betray in the future. They were all people that she had met in her past lives. If she were to act now, she guessed she might be able to prevent his betrayal. Oliver then brings up the soiree that was going to take place tomorrow, and she asks him what he was talking about. Hearing that, he starts panicking and asks her back if she did not hear about it from Arnold, and she says she did not, which really stressed him out and believed that it was actually his fault for leaving that to him. Rishi assures him not to worry since she would still go there, and he thanks her for that, but more importantly, he suggests her to quickly choose a handmaiden for herself. However, she tells him that she would be fine on her own.